then we met over lunch.
Yep.
We had several other faculty involved in the conversation.
We sure did. We had a whole table full of faculty. We're like, how come I wasn't invited to this? One of them was Jonathan Bromberg-Krause, who's like, what? Who are these students? Why am I not going to this? So we had a lively conversation. We were so exhausted at the end of lunch that I was like, I'm done with this topic. Really. Didn't you feel that way?
Yeah, it was good that we tried the conversation.
Sarah, you took a course with Jim, right?
Yes.
Way back when.
On what?
On horror.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that's how this connection is.
Christian did too.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I teach parasitology. Some people in this room have had parasitology with me. One thing that came up for me that I was still talking about tonight over dinner with you is that I don't typically, as a biologist, think about words like horror or terror or disgust or any negative terms whatsoever about anything biological. Even subjects that ordinary folks might think of that way, I have a hard time applying those words. So I've been working very hard at trying to think about that, but I've trained myself over all my years as a biologist to never see anything as horrible or that I don't want to know more about. And I also realized that I don't really read much horror fiction or science fiction or fantasy or anything like that. I like things very, very real. And in contrast...
Well, so because my background is in literature, I'm probably more inclined to think less rationally, less scientifically than Professor Dyer. And certainly as a kid, I probably read a fair amount of horror and ghost stories and vampire things like that, leaving me sort of, maybe less rational or less scientifically minded, maybe. But I guess maybe we sort of talked about a way to begin might be just asking about the two terms that you guys have brought together. So when you think of parasites, what comes to mind? What are you thinking about?
Tapeworms.
Yeah.
Tapeworms.
Yep.
I had a close call with one. That's
Did
why.
you?
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
But you were eventually eradicated.
Yeah.
So that's the nice thing about tapeworms. And those of you who have parasitology with me know that I usually try to find a positive side to the parasite. The nice thing about it is it's not systemic. So when I was coming up with my list of the most horrific parasites, the ones that are in your intestines, see you later, goodbye, right? If you have a strong enough drug, right? So you weren't going to have that tapeworm for long. But the systemic ones are I mean, when I was trying to think, what's the scariest to me? And actually, at faculty lunch the other day when we started talking about this, I described Naegleria. So let me describe Naegleria to you guys. Some of you are nodding your heads because you had this with me in class. This one gives me the creeps, and I don't usually say that about a biological topic. Fortunately, it's rare, so I don't have to think about it very much. But you can get it around here. So it's not one of these things like, oh, if I'm going to the tropics, I better watch out, I better take my malaria med. No, you can get it around here. It's a tiny amoeba, very versatile tiny amoeba, so you never see it in your sample of water. And it might be in a pond where you're swimming. It could be in a swimming pool if it's a questionable cleanliness, but a pond where you're swimming, or a river where you're swimming, or a lake where you're swimming. And
or a pond that you either jump in or get thrown in?
Yeah, you jump in, or you get thrown in, or you're the sort of person who ducks their head underwater and then snorts water out their nose joyfully, right? So you might know from having eaten hot chili peppers or sauce that there's some neurons that go straight up your nose to your brain. I mean, you can feel them just, whoa, right? You've got your So there actually is a highway from your nasal passages to your brain. It's a primitive kind of neuronal highway. So in very, very rare cases, you'll be in this pond, you'll snort up a little bit of water accidentally, and some of these tiny amoebae will start to travel up this particular neuronal highway to your brain, and then a few days later you'll have just the slightest bit of a headache. But you know what, anyone can have a headache. You might have a headache right now, right? Could have a headache. Slight sort of back of the neck pain, but you can get that, right? Just a little bit of a feeling of unease, and the amoebae literally are starting to eat your brain from the inside out. And it's uncurable, and it's guaranteed fatal. There's nothing you can do with that kind of systemic infection. It's called Naegleria, if you want to look it up. There's no sense in even putting up a sign like don't go here because somebody got Naegleria, because it's like 1 in tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. Mostly that they have no intention of going up here. They're perfectly happy on the outside. They don't actually want to be in your brain. That's not their goal. But once they get there, it's a whole lot of tissue to eat. And just so I got to thinking, this is like part of the decomposition continuum. If you were dead lying on the ground, you'd expect that microbes would start to take you apart piece by piece. You're alive, and here you are sort of being decomposed with nothing that anyone can do. And I was thinking, there's a horrific parasite.
How long did that process take, just out of curiosity?
A few days to short
Man.
weeks. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and there's really nothing that can be done about it. Because you can't get drugs into your brain easily. And so you get sort of the psychosomatic thing going too, especially with these non-specific symptoms, headache, stomach ache. A lot of parasites start that way, right? They don't start with anything more dramatic. A little bit of an itching feeling, we can get that one going too. Little itching, little headache, little. So, anyway, that was the first one I came up with.
All right.
Yeah.
So when we asked you what you thought about when we said parasites, Christian, you said tapeworms. What else comes to mind?
Alien, the movie. I think it's Alien, right? Where they like,
Yeah.
burst out of your body.
Right. Okay. What else?
Well, what was the most horrific parasite I told you about in parasitology, in your opinion?
I think the one that was the most sort of science fictional or paranormal was the liver fluke. Because it had so many specific steps through
Yeah.
so many different hosts.
Right.
And then it's one that you might hear about because they call it like the zombie ant parasite.
Oh,
So-
I got that one. We can actually find a YouTube. So yes, we've got zombie and we've got zombie snail.
Mhm.
Actually,
Snail. Yeah.
yeah.
That's a
I
really
think-
good one.
I think those are the coolest just because it seems so complex.
Yes.
Yeah, they're cool.
Yeah, they are cool.
They essentially just like control the behavior or the brain of their host. And like, I don't, are you going into more detail?
Well, I mean, I could. So here's something that I noticed on YouTube because you can find almost all the parasites that I thought to talk about on YouTube, tiny little clips. I found that my own imagination did more damage to me than YouTube. This is just something that I noticed. I don't usually think about this sort of thing, but the voiceover for these is kind of clinical, or it's cheerful nature show. It's either really clinical, like, and so here's Naegleria, this is what it does next, this is what it does next, and it sort of takes you away from it in kind of an objective way, or it's kind of nature showing. Look at the ant, it's now acting like a zombie, and it's climbing up the grass, and it's doing this. And I actually found that my own imagination was creepier than some of these YouTubes. Not to say we won't show you some things,
Yeah,
kind
we will.
of creepy
But
thing to
is
show
that-
you.
We'll come back to that.
Yes, do.
That issue of imagination. All right, so we have tapeworm, alien, what else? Parasite,
Bacteria.
bacteria. Say more, Jeff.
I watched this documentary on I think it was either NPR or I think it was PBS. It was called Superbug or something. It was just about how with the excessive use of antibiotics, a lot of bacteria have evolved resistance to antibiotics, and to the point where you could just be in the park and get a scrape on your arm and then die from it because it's untreatable with antibiotics.
Right.
So.
Right. Okay.
I don't know if this is on the same page, but regarding insects that will use humans as nests to lay their eggs in.
Yeah, I have that one down. Yeah. So there's a whole nice continuum with flies. And the medical term for what these flies are up to is meiasis. Doctors the cis at the end of things, and you got yourself a syndrome or a disease. So MYAIASIS, I think, myiasis. So here's another one of these continuum where at first it sounds very innocent, and then it starts to sort of progress. So you start off with, okay, I've got a dead bird on the ground. I expect flies to be laying eggs on it, and I expect maggots to be taking that dead bird apart, right? Okay, now I have the sick and weak bird, soon to be dead. Might there be some flies that want to get a little head start on that and might start laying eggs on that bird ahead of time? Yes. Are the maggots going to sort of stay on the surface? Yes, for the most part. Could they possibly burrow in? Well, then you've got your next step. You've got maggots burrowing in, and then you've got your next step where they're burrowing in very deeply, and you've got this whole continuum where you essentially are getting, I could put myiasis up there, but it might be not the best thing to do. There's some really horrible looking,
It's your call.
okay. I don't know if people actually want to see examples of myiasis, but.
Bring
Yes?
it on.
What?
Bring it on.
All right, meanwhile, yes. See, the thing is, when you see these like almost medical things, it's like, yeah, I don't know.
Is this why flies are, you see flies around like a dead bird or a dead
Yeah.
squirrel or something?
Yeah, of course.
I thought they were eating it.
Well, they're laying eggs, okay, I want,
Oh, God.
what I really want is, where's my image thing on this?
Go back,
Okay. I want images.
go back. And do,
All right, well, I'm gonna, can I put, I'm gonna, my
all right.
computer,
While Professor Dyer
what is struggling with
searching
the
the
computer?
internet,
Yeah.
um,
Okay, all right, except that's not that bad. That is not that bad. All right. What I want to find is one where so here are these little holes where the flies are born in, some of them worse than others. There is one of the maggots that has been pulled out of that hole, and that's not that's fairly superficial. That's relatively easy to pick out. I'm not exactly finding the best. There are ones in which the tissue is a lot more eaten away. All right, well, Jim, comments while I
okay, well,
find some.
are you gonna look for a video?
No, I don't have a video of these guys.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I just had like.
Well, I was gonna ask, all right, so we talked a little bit about parasites. When we talk about horror, what do you think about? Unknown. Say more, Christian.
I remember from your class you said like people fear the unknown. Like it could be anything from bugs or even just like a phobia like the weather or something. If it's unknown to you, you fear it because you don't know what it is.
Okay.
And part of you is curious to find out more, but is also scared that it's going to be detrimental to you.
Okay. What else do you think about?
Movies, like horror movies that are meant to just make you feel uneasy.
Horror movies that,
Are meant to make you feel uneasy or jumpy.
okay, uneasy or jumpy. Okay, what's a horror movie that makes you feel that way? You're Kelsey.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't really watch them, but
Okay. So you must have seen one at some point in your.
Feel that way.
What was the new remake that came out?
Carrie? They just redid Carrie.
They redid Carrie, and they redid something about a cabin in the woods, but it wasn't titled that. Anyway, there are lots of good remakes out.
Okay.
Classics.
All right. What else do you think about when we say horror? Jeff?
Criminally insane people.
Purely insane people?
Criminally insane.
Criminally insane people. Like, say more. What about that?
I mean, I don't know. I don't really like the horror movies that are just filled with like blood and gore and just poppy stuff. But I find it more scary when the main character is just experiencing reality like kind of like shifted at a different angle. It's just kind of very like creepy.
Yeah.
Okay. What's a movie like that?
I think it's called like Fatal Attraction.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
What was the last one?
You've seen that, right?
Huh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a show. Interesting, right.
My personal favorites are zombie movies because it's a person like you that has become other, and so you understand. And so it's interesting because you look at this thing that's coming towards you that might have used to been your wife or your child or someone close to you, if they do it right in the movie, that is.
Right.
And it's stuck in that in between.
Yeah.
It's not alive and it's not dead. It's something in between that defies all logic.
It's not, you can't place it in the category.
Yeah.
And it's coming for you.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So, for the purposes of our discussion, I would distinguish between horror and terror. Okay? Let me just draw that distinction. And to some degree, this is artificial, and sometimes these terms are used interchangeably, but I think there's something useful in distinguishing. I think these are popular now, where someone sends you a video of like a kid's birthday party, and then like this monster figure suddenly pops up, right?
No, people don't send me those. What are you talking about?
Wait, really? It's like the maze where like you have to like.
Oh yeah, that's the worst part.
It's something that, it's usually a video that requires you, it says that there's some secret in it, or like
Or-
follow this and you
yeah.
focus it.
Oh.
And you like
Can you do it?
get
Can you do
It wants you to pay attention
Oh,
and try to accomplish some task, and then if you're getting close to finishing it, or if sometimes it's just a time parameter, then it'll just throw something scary at
You
you.
could try it right now, actually.
okay, we can do that next, after we see the zombie stills, yeah.
All
Okay, good.
So,
What you're explaining between like horror and terror.
Yeah.
And then I was gonna ask it's just it's a lesser word, but where was like scary?
well, so I think there's a spectrum,
Okay.
all right? I'm going to use the board. Is that
Okay, do.
There's
All right.
different colored chalk too.
All right. So,
I'm excited about
I'm going to put scary or, we'll go with scary. And then terror, and then horror, okay? So, something can be scary, like you're walking across the dimple, it's 3 a.m., right? And it's a full moon, and there's no one else on the dimple, but you have to walk across because you need to get to Chega from the science center, okay? That could be a little scary. All right? Let's take that scenario one step further. Well, actually, let's pause. Why is that scary?
It's usually psyching yourself out.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you're anticipating something that's probably not going to happen, and you can keep building on it in your mind.
Even though you know, chances are nothing's going to happen, right?
Wouldn't that feeling be learned from association through like that setting being associated with like movies like this?
Sure.
Like, so if you hadn't seen a scary movie, you wouldn't think of that setting as being ominous.
Well, that's a really interesting question, right? Because we've all seen movies where someone is running through a darkened field or darkened forest, right? And the music becomes creepy, right? Which cues us to know that something's about to happen, right? And so you're Jeff, right? Okay. We've seen enough of these that we come to associate that setting with something ominous. Or, for some other reason, some deeper reason, that kind of setting is ominous. And so the movies play off that, right? It's sort of a chicken and the egg. So, for example, I don't know if this was when you guys were in the class, when Meg Kirkpatrick came in,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? So she talked a little bit about how our instinct, we're trained, we understand that something dark can be dangerous, right? So no matter how rational we are, being isolated in a dark setting is instinctually ominous, okay? Maybe. All right, so there you are, Jeff. You just finished studying for your biochem exam, okay? And it's late, and you need to get back to Chapin, okay? And you're crossing the dimple at 3 a.m., and there's a full moon, and nobody else is out on the dimple because they're all either busy studying or sleeping or doing community service, okay? So it's just you, right? And you're walking across the dimple, and suddenly, out of nowhere, Sarah says, "Boo!" Right? And you're likely going to experience a moment of terror, okay, which I'm going to define as a sort of sudden shock. But what happens once you realize it's Sarah?
Return to previous state.
Right.
Calm down, calm down.
Right. Your level of tension is sort of relieved, right? And maybe you and
Completely,
Sarah
or-
laugh. Right.
Are you saying that it returns, your level of tension returns to normal like completely, or the same to which you were initially crossing the dimple?
I don't know. So, what do you think?
I think I'd probably be calmer. Well, I mean,
You'd think like,
Yeah.
Not that I'm scary,
what you were
but-
anticipating would have already happened.
yeah, because it's like, oh, okay, here's like, someone jumped out and said boo, like, I don't need to be scared about anything, I'm just walking across the dimple at night.
Right. And presumably, in this case, Sarah is your friend, right? So you're no longer alone,
Yeah.
right? Okay. Now, let's take this scenario one step further, okay? Jeff, you're walking across the dimple, same deal, full moon, right? You're the only one there, and you hear a voice say, "Boo." But as far as you can tell, nobody jumps out. And you can't tell where the voice is coming from. What happens there?
Tension rises.
Tension rises, right?
Imagination goes into overdrive.
Okay. Then you keep walking, and you hear a voice say, "Jeff." Right?
You start running.
Yeah, start running.
All right. So the tension rises. Why?
You don't know what it is.
What's that?
Because you don't exactly know what's.
Okay. Which goes back to what Christian was saying about the unknown, right? Okay. Why else?
It wasn't just one instant. Like maybe you misheard something and you thought it was boo, but really it was just like a bird or
Right.
something.
Right. Which is interesting because in that moment where Sarah says, "Oh, maybe it's just a bird," right? It's a moment where she's heard this disturbing thing and has rationalized it. But now, it's harder to rationalize. Okay. Any other thoughts on the difference here? Jeff?
From like a physiological perspective, the person might experience like just like elevated heart rate and all those things, just like the fight or flight response, getting ready to encounter something. Whereas in the other situation, didn't have time to, undergo those changes.
Sure.
Yeah.
So there's something here about the irrational or the unknown.
Or the invisible, which most parasites are.
Or the invisible.
would unknown be on a spectrum as well? The more that you recognize you don't know, the scarier it is.
What are you thinking of? I have to think
So,
about that.
The situation you just gave us,
Oh, you
so someone's gonna call my name, so now I'm aware that there's somebody out there that I don't know where they are,
Yeah.
but they know who I am.
Yeah.
So that makes it scarier than the fact that, of it just being a noise.
Sure.
And then if it continues, then it's just gonna, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think you're onto something.
Adding more factors, but it doesn't really clear anything up. So
Right.
it just
They're
makes
gonna
it a more
give you more
complicated
questions,
unknown.
So more unanswered questions for yourself to ask.
Yeah.
Or you just continue to rationalize when you rationalize kind of as a way of protecting yourself
Sure.
from what you think might actually be going on or happening. And I'm just wondering if there are like different categories between terror and horror, like, you know, like you said, terror being scared when somebody jumps out at you. But like, when I think of horror, I think of like the supernatural or,
Sure.
or, you know, things like that. There's also horror, like something very real happening to you, like maybe you've been domestic, like in some, you've suffered some sort of abuse or something like that.
Sure.
And that type of horror is a very real, distinct, and knowable horror.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I think that
Is that more trauma? But
It's psychological.
it's a different kind of, right, I could say, let me think of a recent example. I'm horrified by what happened in the mudslide in Washington State,
Yeah.
right?
You just can't imagine, I mean, what's it like to be buried under mud and
Right.
then what happened, yeah, whatever much
But-
about it.
I think that's a different kind of horror than, right? Because, I'm horrified. I can't believe Professor Dyer would give us a midterm due the Monday we get back from Thanksgiving,
That's horrible, horrifying? Do we use the word horror?
right? Or, I can't believe Maddie would wear that scarf. That is horrifying, right?
The word might get misused a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, from the original.
Well, it's used in
But
different
all
categories.
these are different sort of uses. I think the one we're sort of working on is the hardest to define.
So there's an element of the unknown, which is why I think this topic got linked up, right? I mean, the idea of parasites being invisible, yet so potentially destructive, and yet so inexplicably destructive. Maybe I'll roll this video, but
Yeah.
the one thing I realized about this video, this is a complicated parasitic life cycle. We're just seeing part of it. We're seeing the part that takes place in the snail. When I thought to show this particular little clip, I didn't anticipate that it might not work if you're not sympathetic with the snail. You've got to actually feel for the snail if you're going to watch this. Okay, so imagine that maybe the equivalent parasite could be in a human. And what this parasite is going to do, and you'll see it in just a bit, is it's a worm, it's going to creep into the antennae of the snail. So it's going to end up with two worms pulsing into its antennae. The worms are colorful, and that's going to also affect the brain of the snail. It's going to crawl way up onto a leaf where it can be seen easily, and then through no power of its own is going to be there kind of signaling to a bird who's going to come and eat it. But if you don't care about the snail, you might just go, oh, how ridiculous for the poor. But imagine it's you. Imagine that somehow something is going on in your brain that forces you to go into some kind of horrific danger that everyone else of your species would be avoiding. Yeah.
I realize that snails don't necessarily have a consciousness the way you or I mean, maybe
Yeah.
they do, I don't know.
But they have an avoidance behavior from predators. So
Yes. But
yeah.
as they're crawling up the stalk, are they going, oh my god, why am I crawling up the
I don't
stalk the way you
think
or I
so.
would be? But like,
Yeah, I don't think they're saying that. That's why I was like, when I first was reviewing this to show it to you guys, By the way, I don't know if we're gonna have volume on this. Maybe.
Oh, I forgot there's a trick to getting in the,
If we don't have volume, it's okay. I mean, it's a very short, it's like 3 minutes and I know what's going on, so.
alright, so I can, you want me to dim the lights?
Maybe. So you can already see one in its antennae. That antenna is not supposed to be colorful like that. It's not supposed to be, the name of this is leucochloridium.
This person needs to work on their camera skills.
What?
This person needs to work on their camera skills.
I think this is the one that ends with it being eaten by a bird.
Oh, it's actually eaten.
How did the parasite get in the snail in the first place?
So the snail ate some material that had the parasite eggs in it. So it's unusual behavior for a snail, and there is the equivalent behavior in a rodent with toxoplasma. I'll describe the rodent one in a sec. How did you get the voice? Oh.
I just press volume.
Oh, okay. All right.
You want it a little louder?
No, I do not want it louder. What I want to see is that maybe I got the wrong one. Okay, I think I got the wrong one. He ends up being eaten by a bird. All right, sorry. And those, okay, so there's a close-up with 2 worms in his antennae. Just as well we didn't have the sound. Those are worms in his antennae. All right, suffice. Whoops. So is that horrifying? I mean, if you were the snail, I mean, you're being sort of fed to, into danger by your own kind of, whatever is going on inside your head or brain. There are actually lots of parasites that affect behavior. There are parasites that affect rodent behavior, so they place themselves in danger of, canines or felines. There are parasites that affect ant behavior, that put them in danger. So it's actually a fairly common thing, and it's good for the parasite because it means this parasite is going to be able to get into its next host. So extremely advantageous for the parasite to force its way into the antennae of the snail. So is that horrifying, Jim?
Ask these guys.
Yeah, is it?
I'd say the plot is.
Yeah. The plot?
Yeah, I mean, if you were to apply that plot to something more applicable to the everyday person,
Yeah.
then they would find that horrifying.
So if you use it for a science fiction.
Right, so, or, it wouldn't even have to be science fiction, I mean, it could make it like, as Jeff had mentioned earlier, someone who, like, with a criminal mindset.
Or maybe a parasite in his or her brain.
Such a good movie. Sorry.
You can put it on the full screen, I think,
Oh,
if you want.
all right, so I want to take that idea and put it, I think, in more the realm of horrifying. Or more the realm of this horror. I can get it for.
They come from a dying world. They drift through the universe, pushed on by the solar winds. They adapt, and they survive. The function of all life is survival. From deep space, the seed is planted. Terror grows. Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
It's got no detail, no character. It's unformed.
All of a sudden, they're growing like parasites. Is it contagious? People are being duplicated.
How do you know my name? I didn't tell you my name. Can't find anything here that looks like a body. My son's nose bleeding.
It looks like acne.
You're looking at it as if it's human, but not human.
Now, the classic fear begins to grow
We're being cornered.
in a modern masterpiece of science fiction. Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Get down!
Starring Donald Sutherland, Brooke Adams, Leonard Nimoy. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. From deep space, the seed is planted. Terror grows.
So are parasites body snatchers? I mean, parasites typically by numbers fill up bodies and take over their resources. Who's seen that movie? I haven't actually seen it because I don't watch
You
horror.
saw the 1978 version? Really? What the?
Yeah, it was in my beginning of my horror interest. My mom was like, "Hey, watch this one." It was quite enjoyable.
So what makes that different than the video Professor Dyer showed us?
Well, first of all, the quality of mine was not that great. This was pointed out by somebody. It's sort of like, okay, you hold your camera on. Yeah.
If I remember correctly, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, it then, so this alien will control the human into getting more humans, right?
Yeah.
So in that way, it sort of makes it, so if I were to be taken over by this alien, I would want to affect more victims and pass this plague or
Right.
whatever on.
Right.
Whereas if you look back at the snail, the way that that worm is affecting the snail is it's spreading itself, but in a way of ending at the snail. Or like the snail ends instead of going and affecting more snails.
Right, well, the snail is offering himself to be eaten by a bird
Right.
who will be the next host of that particular parasite. So in a way, the parasite is doing this to make more of itself. I think there's some parallels here, actually.
Well, yeah, I mean, the narrator in the trailer says the function of life is survival,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Which is what the parasite is about.
yeah.
I think the movie that I think captures that a little bit better was World War Z, which is basically like the zombie movie, but it's set instead of like a really aggressive mutation of the rabies virus that affected people. But I think an interesting concept in that movie was that the zombies would bite anyone near them to like infect it and spread the virus more, but they wouldn't bite anyone who was terminally ill. Which a kid in the movie, there was a kid who had cancer and was running away from the crowd, but when he fell, all the zombies just went right past him. And I think that was the most interesting concept that I've seen in the zombie movie, was that instead the bad virus itself won't affect someone else that's already going to die. It wants a clean, healthy host.
Okay, so what about the whole idea of the parasite trying to keep you alive? I was trying to think of what, what's different about parasites, especially from the point of view of thinking about them as in a horror kind of way. It's almost like you're being predated upon, but from the inside out in a way that keeps you alive for as long as possible. I mean, a really good parasite is going to do it really slowly. And if they do it right, you're not going to end up dead. You're just going to end up with maybe some serious internal problems. So the very best parasites are predating you by the thousands, maybe by bigger numbers, from the inside out, invisibly, without you being able to do anything about it, and you're alive for long enough to reproduce is what their goal is. That's horrible.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I just got here, but I don't know. I'm gonna venture like a guess at like a possible difference between the two, like the movie and Parasites. I think from what you just said, maybe parasites do a better job of taking over in the sense that like these people we were freaking out about what was happening, but I'm not certain, at least from what I saw, that the snail really understood what was going on.
Right. What if you were a human though that got a parasite? See, the thing is, people typically in our culture, you know, with medicine available, it's not high on our list of things that are going to happen to us. So probably people in this room have not had a parasite.
Or a serious enough one that, I mean, we all have parasites.
Well, I tend to think of our bacterial symbionts as not parasites, though. We're full of bacteria.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But I mean the sort of parasite where you'd want to go to a doctor of tropical medicine.
Right.
Sometimes is what you go to around here.
Yeah.
Cindy, what have you had?
No, I was looking at Danielle, actually. She was raising her
It's
hand.
kind of funny because I was watching a House episode just recently, and there was an episode where a healthy female mid-20s teacher had a parasite. It was a tapeworm, and it was laid hidden in her brain for 20 years or something, and it just kept growing, and no one realized it was a time bomb, and they couldn't catch it with MRI or anything. It had to be old school X-rays, because then they would light up like crazy, and they only found it in the thigh because it didn't show up in the brain because it was too deep. But it was
Where
really
did she got it from?
Well, I'm sorry.
Where did she got it from? I'm trying to think of which one. it could be.
Ham. Because ham contains
I got mine from
some
fish.
parasites that wasn't cloned.
I got mine from fish.
Yeah, I know there's a good one you can get from fish. There are relatively few that actually can end up in your brain.
They said it was like one in, whatever shot, but it's House, it's an episode, but it's interesting.
But no one else has had a parasite. No one's had a parasite themselves, right? Oh, you have?
Well, is Giardia?
Oh, Giardia, yeah.
Yeah, I had that when I was really young.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Now the thing about Giardia, and that's an intestinal parasite. The thing about any intestinal parasite is that a little bit of medication and out they go. So they're relatively easily curable. That's why, as I was saying before you came in, I didn't actually put any of those on the list because even though it's kind of creepy to think of them, they don't linger. You can get rid of them. It's the ones that go systemic. So can I, even though I think of myself as a very rational person, at dinner with Jim, I was trying to think, are there any circumstances in which I've gotten kind of irrational on the subject of parasites? And I had suppressed the story for actually I tell it to the parasitology class. I deliberately tell it to the parasitology class, but generally I suppress anything that's about me being like totally irrational. So then I remembered it at dinner, okay? So I was taking a medical mycology class. This is not the Scabies one.
Oh, that's what we were just guessing.
You want that one too? Okay, no, but I was taking a medical mycology class. Mycology is fungi, and medical mycology is fungi acting like parasites. And fungi are great systemic parasites when you stop and think about it. They make these long hyphae, so they're wonderful at traveling deep into tissues, so they don't have to stay superficial. Some of the worst parasites are fungal parasites. So this was slide after slide after slide by a medical mycologist from Harvard Medical School, actually, which plays into the story in a little bit, from the School of Public Health, actually. And just horrific, arms eaten away and sides of faces eaten away, and just horrible stuff. And by the end of it, we were all getting that kind of medical student psychosomatic thing that some of you will get when you go to medical school, where you come up with whatever disease is the disease of the day, because it's usually headache and stomach ache, and you can get one of those quickly if you need to, right? So at the end of the day, we had seen fungi doing all kinds of horrible things, including discoloring your hand. And so I went back to the lab, I was working under my microscope as usual, and I spotted a little spot of blue on my hand, and I was like, whoa. Because we had seen a fungus that starts as a little spot of blue. A really rare, tropical, unusual fungus that starts as a little spot of blue. And I was like, hey, I call over my fellow graduate student, look at that. And they're like, I put it under my dissecting scope. I take a probe and start poking at it. So I'm like, what? Oh, it's a little bit deeper than I thought. And then I get another student to come over. And finally, I say, overnight, I start to get myself into a panic. And then I phone the person at the School of Public Health at Harvard, and I say, I really need to come over. I think I may have chromomitosis or something. Yeah. Very kindly, she said, yeah, come on over. Big production to go over there. And it was a spot of ballpoint pen ink. But it's sort of like I was just absolutely, I was like, panic attack kind of thing, right? Knowing this thing was going to eat away my entire hand. Yeah. So there was that kind of fear of the irrational combined with having got just a little hint of what it could do. That was just totally irrational of me. Don't you think? Yeah.
Well, how did the ballpoint pen ink go deep? I mean,
See, here's the thing. I think if you were trying to reproduce this, if we were all to go home and try some ballpoint, it'll soak in a little bit. You've got an outer layer of keratin, you got your next layer of keratin, you got. So I mean, it's like it could soak in a little bit.
Right.
I might have exacerbated it with the probe as well. Yeah. So.
how long did it take to determine it was just ballpoint pen ink?
Seconds, once I got it over to the Harvard Medical School and wasted the time of this, expert on tropical medicine.
Right.
It's like. But then I did get a parasite for real, so if it's appropriate, we can talk about that. But that was a horrific one.
Well, now that you brought it up, do you?
Well, I don't want to dominate by talking about parasites.
That's okay,
or
I could go back to my topic in a second.
Okay.
Go ahead. Sarah's eager for you to tell the story.
Oh, no, I'm fine. I'm fine
She
either
might
way.
be fine with it, yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
all right. So, is there a link here between parasites and horror? Good.
So, like, one fascination I have with parasites is, this might, again, have something to do with the fact that I wasn't here for the first part of this, but I don't really see the point in them. Like, in terms of, like, they seem different to me than other creatures. Like, I'm familiar with, like, the Buddhist or Jainist, like, ideals of, like, sort of, like, non-violence to all things.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to parasites, like, I don't have, like, like, that same compassion, like, it's very hard for me to have toward them. If you know what I'm saying, because, like, most creatures, like, I mean, those, like, survival of the fittest, but even that is, like, fair, whereas parasites, it's just, like, to me, there's something very strikingly different about how they behave and how, I guess, single-minded and like, not, like, knowingly, like, selfish in terms of how we think of it, but their actions are very, like, just completely self-serving. At least the parasites we're talking about, not like the lampreys or, like, what have you.
They're really totally other from us. They're not in our world. They're not of our size. They're not in our morphological range. You have to struggle to see them at all if you get to see them under a microscope. So they're really totally other, and yet here they are being intimate with us. I mean, in our deepest tissues, some of them.
So that's sort of what I find horrifying, just to answer the question, is that exact fact that they're so different and so, like, yeah, exactly, close to home, and it's their nature is such that you don't want them to be close to home. Right. Right.
Yeah.
I think also going back to the zombie ant on that, not only is it, the zombie ant parasite, the liver fluke has such this elaborate life cycle with so many multiple hosts, and I remember I was talking to Sydney about it, and she's like, that just seems really, like, out of the way. Like, why would you go from this one to the other one and then go out this way, but then go into this one when you could just, somehow, like, stay in the pig, or, like, stay in the rabbit, or, like, the cow, because I'm sure a cow, like, sometimes will eat other cow poop. Like, why does it then need to go to the ant and then to the snail, like, all around to different areas, or the snail and the ant, and sort of seeing this way of, like, it's so terrifying because, or it's not so terrifying, but there's that possible horror in it of, like, it's going through all these extra steps when, if you would think about it, like, I would think evolutionarily, like, it's amazing that the parasite was able to do that, but also wouldn't it be easier if you could just be in one host the whole time.
Problem is, if
Well-
when you're really tiny and your host is enormous though, that's like you trying to move a mountain. I mean, ideally for the parasite, you would never die and you would always just be a huge pile of meat for them. But unfortunately, a given host is gonna die, and so they've gotta figure out a way to exit, tiny as they are, from this huge pile of resources that we are. I mean, we're different for them too. Not only are they different for us, but we're different for them. What were you gonna say, Jim?
Well, I think the comments you guys are making suggest a couple things. One is the loss of control. So let's go back to Jeff walking across the dimple, right? He's been studying for his biochem exam, and then his plan is he's going to go to bed, he's going to wake up, get a nutritious breakfast, and maybe exercise and take the exam, right? But when he's walking across the dimple and he hears this strange voice call his name, a voice he can't identify, one of the things that happens is he is no longer in control, right? His plan, the way he's ordered the world, is suddenly disrupted. And we all exist with this illusion that we're in control. And part of what's horrifying, I think, about these parasites is they shatter that illusion. Jeff could be a perfectly nice, decent person. Sarah could be a terrible person, a total jerk, right? But Jeff might get the parasite. The other thing that I think we do when we think about the kinds of parasites that Professor Dyer is describing is we ascribe malevolence to them, right? Even though rationally, scientifically, we know they're just parasites, being parasites. It's hard for us to resist projecting some sort of malevolent intention, right? When Jeff, the perfectly nice, decent guy, gets a parasite, and Sarah, the complete jerk, doesn't get one, our reaction is, that's not fair. But putting it in terms of fair is actually has nothing to do with it. Parasites don't know from fair. They're just parasites doing their thing. But we're trying to make sense of it, and so it doesn't seem fair to us, right? So I think part of what makes these tales of parasites scary is our loss of control, right? And we believe that if we're good people, if we do the right things, these things shouldn't happen to us. But they will. Further, when they do happen, we think there's some evil force behind this parasite. It's very hard not to sort of anthropomorphize the parasite. But they're just parasites, doing what parasites do. Now, let me add another layer to this. Why do we do these things? Why do we think it's unfair that Jeff got a parasite and Sarah, the jerk, didn't get one, right? Have you ever encountered a ghost, a real ghost? I'm not counting Professor Dyer. All right. How many of you believe in ghosts? But we know ghosts aren't real.
Maybe you know ghosts aren't real.
Well, I think you're right. So, how many of you have encountered a vampire?
If I have, I wouldn't know it.
Hmm?
You said if I have, I wouldn't know it.
Okay. it would be terrible, Jeff, if you were the only non-vampire in this room and it turned out we were all ironic.
Surprise.
All right. So nobody here has encountered a vampire. How many of you believe in vampires? Nobody. Okay.
I believe there could be some kind of like thing like a parasite that could do
Sure.
something like that to
Well,
a
I mean,
body.
you know, the traditional vampire.
Yeah.
Not like one of those namby-pamby ones on Twilight. Like the real ones, right? Okay.
Old school, Stephen King vampire.
Yes.
Yes, and Nosferatu.
Okay. But I bet if Jeff walking across the dimple at midnight, if setting were just right and a bat swooped too close to him, you might think about vampires for a moment. Just for a moment. And I think what happens is, even though we know these things aren't true, we don't believe in them. At some very deep, primitive level, we do believe in them.
But Jim, parasites are true.
Hang on. I'm getting Wait, parasites are true? So, there is always this irrational side of us. And it varies maybe from person to person, right? But these things that we know aren't true. There's some deep part of us that will activate those beliefs in the right setting. So, when you get that parasite, right, it's really hard to see it as just a parasite, as just a microbe. Instead, what we see it as this malevolent thing that intentionally infected us, right? Knowingly infected us. We engage in this sort of magical thinking. And that, I think, is where horror and parasites sort of overlap. Because what this is all about accessing those magical thoughts. That ghosts are real, that vampires are real, whatever, right? That in our day-to-day, we don't accept. But I guarantee, well, I'm willing to bet, most of us here at some point have experienced fear of the dark. Right? What's that all about? It's those sort of, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say primitive beliefs suddenly being accessed. Even if you walk into a familiar room that's dark, you might still feel that sort of irrational fear. All right, we're past 8.
Oh, goodness.
Did you want to add?
Oh, I could add various things, but.
Well, do you guys want to add things or have questions for us? Yeah.
So I think, like, the arrival of those irrational thoughts, like if a bat were to swoop by or whatever, I think is like, kind of like a defense mechanism for the preservation of your ego. Just like when your heart beats really fast and your, I don't know, your eyes dilate is a physiological response, like for defense mechanism for your physical body. I think.
Like physiological warnings?
Yeah, well, I was trying to say that, like your heart beating fast, that's like a physiological defense mechanism for your physical body, whereas these seemingly irrational thoughts are a defense mechanism because like these seemingly like mystical or magical things that are happening around you seem to like challenge your ego.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
And when you use the word primitive, it makes me think of why did these types of like thought processes evolve in the first place, and maybe having these weird, unpleasant feelings that provoke even more stress might make an organism like want to remove itself, so they don't have to experience those.
Yeah, absolutely. There may be a protective function of some kind.
Right.
Yeah.
And actually, humans are very bad at figuring out causalities. We were talking about this at dinner too. And actually, Jeff, you know this from all your stats that you're doing, that We're very bad at determining whether something is just a correlation, there's two things that happen to be happening, you know, in the same time, in the same vicinity, or one is actually causing the other, and we have a real tendency to look for causalities. And it's probably a defense mechanism because you've got a second to react to something in the dark over there. And you have to assume that it's, if you want to stay alive, that you've got to react immediately. It can't be like, well, here's a correlation. I'm walking across the dimple and there's a funny sound over there, right? No statistical significance to that is not what should be going through your mind. So I think we're really good at jumping to conclusions. Yeah.
Also, like, how much of it is like a disconnect from like nature, possibly? Because like I know I've studied like in a bunch of my classes how we're like removing ourselves from the natural world and like how we think about the natural world even. So I feel like maybe just like going on what you were saying about control, like feeling like it's so horrifying to things around us, like are horrifying to us because we don't know like what they are, like the unknown, being in the dark, for example, and thus it's out of our control. Whereas if like we're constantly in an environment that's not structured and like where we sort of have like feel like we have complete control, at least it wouldn't be maybe like terrifying in the same way, at least.
So if you were a vampire hunter,
Thank you.
and you dealt with vampires all the time,
Thank you.
you might not feel quite as terrified. Okay.
Right.
Or if it were 1,000 years ago and there was no medicine of the sort that we have now, we'd all have a parasite load. We'd all have some sort of external parasites, including maybe some sort of lice or something. We'd all have worms. We would all, and it would just be sort of part of the usual way of being. The same way it's completely usual for us to get colds during the winter, or to get a cough, or to get a stomach ache, and we don't go crazy about that. We just, oh, okay, got a virus infection, got a little bacterial thing. So there are things that are okay to have and things that are not okay, and right now we don't have a whole lot of tolerance for the kind of parasites that our ancestors probably had routinely. You could take any wild animal, if you found a roadkill squirrel, freshly dead, I know because I've done this, brought it into parasitology class, looked it through its fur and inside of it, it's got a lot of parasites. And that's just the usual parasite load for a squirrel. It's got internal and external parasites. And it's fine. And parasites are doing great. Just that we have zero tolerance for that, I know, in this particular, where we are right now. Like, it's not okay to die of a parasitic disease. It's okay to die of a heart attack. Not to say it's okay, but if you heard someone died of a heart attack, you go, yep, sounds about right. If you heard they died of a parasitic disease, you'll be, what is wrong? Something's wrong with that, right? Why didn't they do whatever we do to prevent that?
Sarah, you had your hand up.
Oh, I was just gonna say how I think it's interesting that if you go back to the idea of horror, and how that stems with the unknown, and you're afraid of the unknown, and you take your typical monsters, like zombies, like vampires, like werewolves, like ghosts, and you take those and you look at them a little more, where they're coming from is explanations for something unknown. And they were seen as like maybe more of fact, as like an explanation for this is, oh, of course it's like, you know, this monster in the sewers, like that, well, maybe it isn't gonna be monster in the sewers, but like it's this specific monster that we've made up, and oh well, and also like correlation and causality, you see like, oh well, these people like never come out at night, and we've also had this many deaths, and oh well, they must be demons, they must be vampires, and this is now a symptom of vampires, because you can't come out during the day. And sort of building up all these things to create something to explain an unknown, but then later on, because we've already been able to explain what was then unknown, or because we have more information to say that it's unlikely, like it's unlikely for there to be a vampire, that it makes it more scary, because what was created to explain the unknown is now an unknown as well. that makes sense.
I can follow you.
Okay.
Any last questions or comments? All right. Well, thank you guys for having us.